There's tens of thousands of anti-Brexit protest marchers in Parliament today. Is it time to rejoin the EU? Well, you're watching and listening to GBNews Saturday with me, Martin Dormy. We're going to the debate now. We are joined by Anne Widdecombe, of course, former Brexit Party MEP and a Conservative minister, and Richard Morley, who is the deputy leader of the Rejoin EU party. Let's start with you, Richard. We had a vote. We voted to leave. Why should we be rejoining?
Well, I very much agree with what Gina Miller said. It's because of the flow of public opinion. Every month we see more and more people in polls wanting to rejoin or at least move closer to the EU than we currently are. It's a public demand that's happening. We're merely responding to it by representing that growing demand.
Widdecombe, would you care to respond to that?
First of all, what is not being explained here by Gina Miller or by anybody else is the sheer costs and the upheaval that would be involved in rejoining. We'd almost certainly have to take on the euro, for example. The costs of rejoining would be prohibitive, and there would still be a very large section of the country against it. It wouldn't be worth the political upheaval. So, I think you might just as well campaign for a flat earth as campaign to rejoin the EU. But there is something much more subtle which can happen and which I think is at the top of Starmer's agenda, which is you don't rejoin the EU, you just stay aligned to it. So you accept its law, you accept openness of borders, you start accepting things that we actually rejected in the course of that referendum. But I also blame the Brexiteers. Because I think we need to make the case much more clear. We've had some fantastic trade deals, entry to a market that's 500 million people. We've had fantastic trade deals, and we don't make the most of it. And all you ever hear from the Brexiteers is grumbling that Brexit hasn't been done, which it hasn't been. But even the little that we have done, I think has brought big benefits, and we should be shouting them from the rooftop. And it's not true what Gina says, that Brexit has broken Britain. Brexit has actually helped Britain, and it's worth pointing out that our exports to the EU are up.
Richard Morley, Anne Widdecombe says that rejoiners are flat earthers.
Well, I think that's a bit of an amusing remark from Anne. But the point is she was talking about the cost of rejoining, and we shouldn't lose sight of the cost of leaving, which was, of course, immense. And we only have to speak to small businessmen up and down the country, farmers who are struggling because of the results of Brexit. So many businesses and people are suffering as a result of Brexit. That is the real cost of it. And that cost would be alleviated if we move towards integration with Europe, particularly with free movement of goods and people, which is what the people most want. That are now voting to rejoin or polling to rejoin. And I don't think that the cost argument is at all valid.
And do you think that we should be led by polls on this? Polls seem to say different things. Should we be led towards a second referendum by opinion polls? After all, no opinion poll called that Brexit would actually happen.
Yeah, I think we should be led by common sense on this. We know that one of the reasons why people voted to leave was because we didn't want open borders. We did want to control our immigration. So to go back to free movement of people would be actually to negate one of the biggest benefits of leaving. So I don't believe that woman. I think we need common sense. We need to say, look, we've had this upheaval. Democratic, political, everything else. We've had this upheaval. We're now coming out the other side of it, and we're starting to see the benefits, and we need to stay on that road, going into another period of what was almost unarmed civil war during the Brexit campaign, going through another period of that to get a result that will be rejected by a large proportion of the population if it should happen, I think is just nonsense. I don't know any sensible politician who would want that.
Richard Morley, since the Brexit referendum and indeed before it, a lot of working class voters, a lot of Brexiteers in particular, said that Remainers and now Rejoiners always felt that they knew better and that people were conned when they voted for Brexit. Do you still stand by that?
Well, I think a lot of false information was given about Brexit at the time that the referendum was taken and at the time when Boris Johnson actually led us out of it with his so-called deal, but it was really a no-deal Brexit, let's face it. So consequently, I don't really think that the public are at all now of the same opinion as they were. And if Anne was right, and there wasn't, Brexit was working as she thinks it is, then there wouldn't be such an enormous movement away from Brexit now towards rejoining. And people are doing that because of the effect of Brexit in their pockets. And when I was talking about free movement, I was really talking about the British people's wish to have free movement in Europe, to be able to live and work there, come backwards and forwards as they choose. That is the freedom of movement that they miss. Moreover, farmers up and down the country really missed the agricultural workers, the seasonal workers that came along to their farms and picked the fruit. Hotels up and down the country are out of staff because the seasonal workers that used to come from Eastern Europe no longer can. And talked about immigration. Well, quite frankly, the immigration scene since Brexit has been an absolute disaster. We're not able to control our borders. This is plainly seen.
And Widdecombe, over to you.
Issue is going to get worse and worse.
Richard, allow Anne to respond.
Right. First of all, the claim that we had a no-deal Brexit is farcical. We would have welcomed a no-deal Brexit. And that would have actually enabled us then to go forward on a completely new path. We actually signed a deal that tied us into many of the EU's regulations and its rules for a very long time to come. So we did not have a no-deal Brexit. I won't call it a lie because that is rather provocative, but I will call it a wholly unsubstantiated statement that's just been made. And secondly, when we come to talk about false information, do you remember what Cameron and Osborne said? If people dared to vote Brexit, we were going to have an emergency austerity budget. There was going to be a collapse in employment the very next day. I mean, all this rubbish was taught and was shown to be false. And as for controlling immigration, we are out of control of illegal immigration, but that is because Britain isn't doing what it jolly well ought to do.
Richard, would you care to respond to that?
Well, I mean, one thing about trade deals. Anne talked earlier on about the wonderful trade deals that Britain has struck since Brexit. And when you look at that Pacific trade deal signed only a couple of months ago, over the next 20 years, it's going to bring us a return of something like 0.8% increase to our GDP. It really is rather minor by comparison to the trade that we've lost to Europe and the difficulties that English people and British people are having in selling their goods to Europe now. Many companies are going bust. And that is the issue. We've got to think more about the effect of Brexit on ordinary British workers and employers, because they are suffering, and that's why they're coming over to us and leaving Anne.
And Widdecombe.
So if it's so bad for us, why are our exports to the EU up? And now that we've opened up other markets, I wouldn't sneeze at 0.8% increase. I wouldn't sneeze at that. Now that we're opening up other markets and they all bring their percentage increases, that is going to do us a very great deal of good. And I think we should look at those positives instead of always coming out with blaming Brexit for everything. And that is part of the trouble. The Gina Miller's side has got away with, and so have some Remainers in Parliament, have got away with blaming Brexit every time anything goes wrong, as if there was no COVID, as if there was no Ukraine war, as if nothing else had happened in our lives, as if other countries weren't suffering too. They just blame Brexit, and that is gradually seeping through, and it needs to be countered vigorously. That's down to the Brexiteers to do.
Richard Morley, what do you say to that allegation, final word to you, that everything bad that happens to Britain is because of Brexit and nothing good is despite Brexit?
Well, Annie's right insofar as that there have been other factors that have affected the economy. But that has been true across the world. The point is that in Germany, there are much fewer impacts of these other events than there are in Britain. And Germans can still have a much greater amount of money in their pocket at the end of each month than Britons can. For example, it's becoming more and more widespread across Europe now to have rent controls to stop unscrupulous landlords charging unwarranted amounts of money for ordinary accommodation, which is what is happening all across Britain and is causing immense problems. European integration would put an end to that.
OK, Anne Widdecombe, final word to you.
Yes. I mean, the idea that Germany suffered less from the Ukraine war than we did. They were rationing hot water at one point because of their stupid energy policy. So don't please quote Germany as, a great model of success, because at the moment it's heading towards being a basket case. OK, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks to both of you, Anne Widdecombe and Richard Morley, Deputy Leader of the Rejoin EU Party. We pride ourselves... Goodbye, au revoir. No, he's in France. We pride ourselves here on GB News of listening to both sides of the story so you can make your own minds up. That's been sadly missing from the mainstream media, I believe, since 2016. Now,